Okay.
Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us today. This is going to be a webinar featuring Michelle Wild, who's going to be covering using apps to help executive function issues in school and everyday life. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us, and I will turn this over to you.
Thanks. So I am a community college professor at Coastline Community College, or Coastline College now, in Newport Beach, California. And I've been working with the brain injury population for about the last 32 years or so within an educational environment. So I'll talk a little bit about Coastline in just a few moments. But in addition to that, I also founded a nonprofit about 3 years ago called Brain Education Strategies and Technology. And we create apps and like to do trainings on apps as well as cognitive skills to help individuals post-injury. So the topic for today is using apps to help executive function issues in school and everyday life. And so there's a couple of disclosures here. I just mentioned I do not get paid from BEST, so that's the nonprofit. We also have some session objectives. So it looks like it's jumping off the screen. Oh, there we go. Identifying 3 important app features related to executive function issues. So we'll talk just a little bit about executive function and what features are most relevant from our perspective on issues. We'll also look at several different apps. If you've ever participated in a webinar that I've done in the past, you will have seen these apps. I'll explain why I keep going back to the same apps over and over again. So we'll talk about that. And then finally, we're going to describe how 3 different apps can address executive function issues. So that's sort of our goal for today. I'm joined today with part of my class here at Coastline. So Coastline College started the first acquired brain injury program in the country back in 1979, long before anyone else was doing cognitive rehabilitation within a school format in a formalized way. So we started in 1979. We have evolved since that period of time, and we're still one of the only, if not the only, community college-based full-time cognitive remediation or cognitive retraining program. So this is just a graphic that kind of illustrates what we work on here at Coastline. So if you look at the graphic, you'll see that we have 5 different sessions throughout the calendar year. And each session addresses a different cognitive topic or combination of cognitive topics. So we're currently in the fall first 8-week session. So we're just finishing up problem solving and internal memory techniques. We'll move on to organization and note taking in the next 8 weeks. Then we'll move into decision making and reading to learn techniques, time management and memory. And then over the summer, we do special topics. So we'll choose something particular. Oftentimes it's learning styles or something like that. We did mindset recently. So we're always looking for new topics to kind of focus on. You'll also see that we address psychosocial issues here at Coastline. So we work on emotional intelligence, brain anatomy, cognitive behavioral strategies, and communication as our primary psychosocial topics. In addition to that, that middle cog is really one of the most important cogs because it's what we're working on simultaneously all the time. So we focus on goal setting, we focus on self-regulation, compensatory skills, and transition planning. And we just had a presentation this morning in my class before we started doing the webinar on resilience. And it was very interesting because the student was talking about resilience and kind of indicated that pretty much everything we work on here at Coastline is focused on building resilience in our students. So it was a really great insight on his part, and I think we need to add resilience to our cog at this point. So I have some students here. I'm going to let them briefly introduce themselves. If just tell a little bit about yourself if you don't mind. The idea for today's webinar is a little bit different. Rather than necessarily demonstrating a bunch of apps, I'm happy to do that. So if you'd like to see demonstrations as we go through the process, you can certainly incorporate that into the chat box, and I will be happy to do that. But I really wanted the students to share with you sort of how they use technology, both at school and in their personal lives, and how they see the benefits of using that technology on their executive function skills and the improvement in executive function. So that's kind of the goal for today. Do you guys anyone want to introduce yourselves briefly, just so that they have an idea? Go ahead.
So hi, I'm Laura Gomez. I was in a car accident in 2016 and started here about a year ago. I'll be going on my second year next session.
Thank you.
Hi, so my name is Lisa Hirsch. I'm a brain injury survivor from a hypoxic brain injury in 2013, and I am currently on my second year here at Coastline.
My name is Yashar. I had a traumatic brain injury in 2004, and this is my second year here at Coastline.
Okay, so that's 3 students that we have here in the room. One thing that I will mention is Yashar was injured at a younger age, right, Yashar? 17. So he is one of at the age that he had his brain injury, is one of the age groups that you work with a lot at Siebert. So he has some very interesting insights that he will share with us as we move forward. So the idea of executive function, I know all of you know executive function, but I wanted to have a slide here just to give you a general idea of the kinds of things that we believe apps can actually address quite effectively as it relates to executive function. So planning, organizing, remembering, time management, prioritizing, paying attention, getting started on tasks, on initiation, and mental flexibility are all major issues with executive function. And I think that we can speak to how all of these issues are being addressed by the use of technology in the program. So we'll do our best for that. We're happy to take questions. If you want to type something in the chat, you can certainly do that. We can wait till the end. But if you have a question about something, please feel free to type it in the chat and we can kind of follow along with that. But again, planning, organization, remembering things, time management, prioritizing, paying attention to details, getting started or initiating tasks, and mental flexibility are all things that we work on here specifically with technology. We use what we call making cognitive connections. And that idea is basically showing individuals the benefits of using smart devices or smart technology. One of the things that's important, I found over the years, I've been using smart devices within the cognitive rehab environment for probably 10 years or more, from the very beginning when the very first HP iPAC handheld device became available. We started using them here at Coastline. And there's a lot of benefits of using the smart devices, but it's really important to show individuals what those benefits are. So many people use their devices, their iPads or their iPhones, specifically for gaming or for communication, and they don't really look at the devices as a cognitive rehabilitation tool. And so we want to make sure that people see the benefits of using the devices as a tool. Often we talk here about the devices being kind of a cognitive prosthetic for the brain. And that's because a lot of people use the devices in that particular way. Sometimes people will indicate, oh, well, that means they're using it as a crutch. Please don't ever say that to my students, because they will get very upset. They're using the devices just like I'm using the devices, just like you're using the devices, as a productivity tool to help us stay on track. And there's a lot of benefits to that. Another thing that we like to do with making cognitive connections is to teach the fundamental technical skills. So it's about teaching people how to use the technology, so the step-by-steps and that kind of thing. But it's also about teaching them the cognitive skills that are being applied as they're using the technology. So for instance, all of those executive function skills that we mentioned previously, I said, can be integrated into the use and the teaching of the technology. And that's really what we're talking about in terms of the cognitive skills being applied to the device use. And then ultimately emphasizing the benefits of the smart devices within a rehabilitation environment or within that process of rehabilitation. So we advocate using just a few apps. If I look on my phone, I have probably 200 apps or more on my phone. A lot of people have a lot of apps. We typically don't use all of them. I use really a handful of the apps that I have on my phone because they're the most efficient for me, because they give me the biggest bang for my buck, so to speak. I have a lot of apps on my phone because people tell me to download something. Oh, you've got to try this, or you've got to try that. And what happens for individuals with brain injuries, as well as the rest of us, when we have all those apps on our phones, we get overwhelmed. We don't know which app to use for which purpose. And so some of the benefits of limiting those the number of apps that are used is that it's really easier to find information. It makes it less overwhelming for people. One of the things that you can do is you can create folders on your devices so that you have kind of like apps together, which is, again, a great demonstration of that making cognitive connections idea of categorization. It's a great opportunity to teach categorization skills just in simply showing people how to group apps together, either in a folder or even on a separate home screen. Another reason why you might want an app toolbox is because some apps can be used for a lot of different purposes. And what we're going to talk about today, and what I can demonstrate for you, is how just a handful of apps, we have 6 or 7 apps that we tend to recommend over and over and over again, can be used for a ton of different things. And that eliminates the need to learn too many apps. It makes it easier when updates occur. And it really is easier to track the overall effectiveness and the consistency of the apps themselves, as well as the resiliency of the developers. One of the things that happened is I was just going through my phone not too long ago, and I moved to the new iPhone 11, and so I restored all of my apps. And as I was doing that, I kept seeing all these different apps that were no longer supported by the operating system. And it wasn't just because I had gone to iOS 11, but it was just because a lot of apps are kind of here today, gone tomorrow. So it's really important that you, in your app toolbox, that you identify and find apps that are going to be there, that are going to be resilient, and that the developers of those apps are committed to keeping those apps out there in the world. So here are some of the app features that we feel are really important. And I'm going to have the students that are here talk about these app features. I'll say each one, and then they can talk just a little bit about why these app features are so important for them in what they're doing. So the first app feature is reminders. Does anyone want to talk just a bit about the importance of reminders in what you're doing and how you're using the technology?
So this is Laura. So I use reminders in Pace My Day. So the Pace My Day is an app that helps me manage my fatigue, as well as actually remind me of things that need to be done, although the main purpose is to help me manage my fatigue and to make sure that I'm not trying to accomplish more than I actually can in the day. And what I like about the reminders is until you yourself get really used to using the app the reminders really help you. So that's why I like the reminders in that app. And then also in Coastline College, complete my to-dos, because so often I find myself forgetting something, even if I believe that I'm going to remember. So having those reminders in there really helps me.
Anybody else on reminders? How about category? Well, let me say one thing about reminders, because I think this is an important piece of the puzzle. So many apps have the ability to set reminders. And so one of the things that tends to happen is that although reminders is a great feature, if it's overused, it can really become a detriment. So if reminders are going off all the time, people don't necessarily know what the reminder is related to, and we get very used to it. And so we get kind of reminder fatigue, for lack of a better phrase, where people just begin to ignore reminders. So there's some interesting possibilities on how to address that. One of the ways in which we've addressed it in some of the apps that we've created is we have a reminder that can be set to check everything. So rather than set 50 reminders or 20 reminders for different types of things, if you set a reminder, the way we do it is we set a reminder, let's say every 3 hours throughout the day. And the Best Suite app allows this to happen. If you set a reminder for every 3 hours throughout the day, and that reminder prompts you to check your apps and what you need to be doing, that's actually a different technique or a different strategy than a lot of people use, rather than setting all the reminders at one time in terms of for each and every app that you have. So that's one example, and I can show you that as we move forward. Another way in which we've kind of addressed that particular issue is within the Best Suite, we have a sort of a separate app, if you will, called My Reminders. And what that section of the app does is it actually pulls all the reminders from the 4 different apps that are part of the Best Suite into one place, so that you can actually see all the reminders across 4 different apps. And that can be very helpful as well in terms of a technique. So reminders are extremely important, a very important feature, but can be overused and can ultimately become problematic. So categorization is another app feature. Being able to group things like items together can be very helpful. Does anyone have anything to say about categorization?
Yeah. This is Yashar again, and my brain injury was mainly frontal lobe, and so executive function has been an issue ever since. And so having one place where I can go with organized information has helped me tremendously. I was the type of person before coming to Coastline that would have 200 apps and way too many reminders. And so by having it all in one place in a non-overwhelming format, let's say, has been extremely helpful for me staying on track in my life.
Thanks. Another app feature is what I have here is integration. And integration relates to sort of a different perspective. What we've done with our Best Suite is we have really 4 apps in one, and all the information from all 4 apps is shared across the 4 different apps. So if you enter something in one app, potentially you have access to that information in any one of the other apps that are part of the suite. That's an interesting kind of take on things. And I think that it's a really important feature. Do you guys have thoughts on the integration in the Best Suite and how the apps talking to each other and sharing information, kind of what impact that has?
I mean, for me, it kind of goes to a mental flexibility thing. As far as after the brain injury, I tended to be much more inflexible. And so, okay, this app is used for this app is used for this. And so by having them all communicate with each other, I see how the different aspects, whether, you know, it's what I need to do today, long-term goals, how they all fit together. And so it helps me generalize. what I'm doing into kind of the big picture.
Another way that it helps me is that, you know, Michelle mentioned before, and so did Yashar, that, you know, they have over 200 apps, right? So with the 4 apps in one talking to each other, one, having them all in one place, and just to go to one app in one place is really helpful, but having them talk to each other is really helpful, because literally you put something, let's say, in Reach My Goals, if I put a task that I need to do, it will appear, I can add that quickly into Pace My Day and complete my to-do. So I'm not there's no redundancy in that, and it really helps in that sense.
Good. So another app feature that we think really impacts and addresses the idea of executive function is feedback. Feedback in terms of reports or summaries of information. And so in a lot of apps that you'll find, you'll be able to sort of see, you know, all the different, let's say in a task management app, you can go in and you can see all the completed tasks, etc. But there's not really a way of generating a report that can then be shared with other people. And so that's something I think that's really important. Another aspect of feedback is really providing the opportunity for individuals to incorporate their own insights. So something like their successes. I think that's an important thing in terms of app features for executive function as well. Another thing is photos and auditory or audio. The ability to integrate audio and photos into apps is really important. That feature allows for better memory encoding. It allows for the ability to go back. We'll show you an example in the Notability app that we highly recommend, of being able to go back and listen to something and to use strategies in order to not waste time and to be more efficient. So do you guys have thoughts about photos and the integration of photos and audio?
So for the photos part, you know, both of them, right? When you have a brain injury, you're not able to remember things quickly. Sometimes you're not able to come up with how you want to say it quickly. So being able to add photos as that extra reminder, or being able to dictate it, just makes it a lot easier, because sometimes having to think with the brain and get it out to your fingers to do it can sometimes derail you.
Okay, another one is the UI or the user interface. It's really important. The UI is really important. It should be basic. Ease of use kind of goes with this, but the user interface, a lot of different apps have very complex user interfaces. They have a lot of bells and whistles. And so a more straightforward, more very basic user interface, I think, is more important for the population that we serve, whether it's kids or adults with brain injury. Are there any questions about the app features? I can see the chat. So if you have a question about app features, please feel free to type something in. Go ahead.
Sorry, Michelle, I did want to add something into the user interface. So with Michelle's background and being our professor here, one thing that she's always looking to do is ask input from us on how it can make it easier. And depending, if you're a long-time user of the app, I think that you'll find that there's been a lot of enhancements to make the user interface a lot easier. So, and I know that that's something that she's continually doing and continually wanting feedback on. So again, if you're a long-time user, I think you'll notice that.
I think another thing about user interface, and this goes back to sort of the resilience of the app and stuff, is I can't tell you how many times an app will change its user interface quite significantly without any warning to the users. And that's a really bad thing for individual users that happen to have a brain injury. So one other suggestion, this is sort of a side thing, but one suggestion and one thing that we'll be implementing in what we do is providing messages to app users that indicate that a change will be coming, just to help give them insight and prepare them. So I think that that's going to be an important component as app developers move forward, especially with apps for our population. So that's just something to consider. So I'm not seeing any questions. Is that right, Amanda, regarding the features? So we'll go ahead and move on.
Yeah, I'm not seeing
Okay.
any questions right now.
Okay, perfect. So just in terms of making cognitive connections, what I have here is just a cognitive skill like visual similarities and differences. One of the features or the functions is tool selection. This happens to come from an app called Notability that we'll talk about in a few minutes. But tool selection is an interesting cognitive, it relates to a cognitive skill, because you'll see here we have a pencil tool and we have a highlighter tool. They look very similar. And so to be able to point out the differences is actually a cognitive skill. So there's a lot of cognitive development that goes on by using the apps. Here's another example where we have a camera tool and we now have a document scanner. More and more apps are integrating the concept of a document scanner. And so what's happening is people really have to begin to visually discriminate between one tool and another tool. Here's attention to details. Again, same kind of thing. The subtlety and the difference between the pen and the highlighter is actually helping people determine or develop attention to detail skills. This is also Notability, and this is for categorization. Notability provides the ability to create dividers and also subjects. So how a person, what kind of dividers and subjects a person creates is really all about the development of categorization skills. And then the final one is decision making. And again, in Notability with dividers and subjects, it's decision making is kind of built in, because if you have a bunch of notes that you've generated or that you've imported or whatever it might be, really filing those notes away is categorization, but it's also decision making. Where do I put this particular note? What section, what subject or what divider do I file this in is really all about decision making. So the apps that we tend to recommend most, as I mentioned, there's really 6 of them, 7 of them. 4 of them are in the Best Suite. So again, full disclosure, the Best Suite is something that we have developed at Best. And it has, as Laura suggested, it has been implemented with the constant input of the students that we have here at Coastline. Probably much to their chagrin. I'm always coming into class and telling them about ideas and asking for suggestions. So one of the apps in the Best Suite is called Strategize My Life. One thing to note is that the Best Suite is only available for iOS at this point in time. But the whole idea of Strategize My Life is to allow people to create strategy lists and to group strategies and then to rate them. The examples that I have on this particular screen and some of the upcoming screens relate to a job. It can generalize to school, but I thought because it's National Disability Employment Month, I wanted to kind of give some examples that would help with that. So this certainly relates to everyday kinds of things as well as school and work. So establishing strategy lists, the idea is to have one place that a person can go to and put strategies. What people do now is they use note-taking apps, so they use Post-it notes, or they'll use pieces of paper to write strategies down if they write them at all. And then the problem is when they need them, they don't necessarily know where to find them, or the strategies or the list is, let's say, at home when they happen to be at work or at school. So to have a place that's reliable that you can go in and identify strategies, write the strategies out, and then show how effective the strategies are is something that we're looking at and wanting to further develop. Do you guys have comments on Strategize My Life?
What I like about it is, like Michelle said, you know, I used to be a note taker and or writing on a notepad. And yeah, what I found was when I actually needed it, it wasn't around me. So being able to put these strategies into Strategize My Life has really been a godsend. And also another good thing, and she kind of mentioned categories and categorization, right? As executive function skills. Within Strategize My Life, you can build, there's already pre-existing categories, but you can also add or change them based on what works for you. So, you know, just a quick example, right? If it's a strategy for what I need to do for school, I can have a category for school and then list, you know, remember to read my iPad, remember to do this, remember to do homework. So that's the way that it can be really helpful for me.
Another app within the Best Suite is Pace My Day, and Laura mentioned that earlier. Basically, that's to help people learn to manage their daily energy, to track what they're spending their time on, how much energy those individual tasks takes, and also to integrate more appropriate breaks and breaks at more appropriate times. So a lot of what we do within the Best Suite really is principles of self-regulation. Reach My Goals is another one of the apps that allows people to set goals, to track their progress on goals, and to generate reports, which include success journals and challenge journals, all of which can be shared with friends or family members if they want to, doctors, therapists, etc. Inspiration Maps is a graphic organization program. Simple Mind Pro is a similar program on the Android, since Inspiration Maps is only available on the iOS system. And basically what Inspiration Maps is it's a way to brainstorm. It's a way to throw ideas onto a screen to be able to manipulate those ideas, move them around, group them, categorize them, and then potentially write a paper if it's for school, or potentially go to the store if it's for planning a party or something like that. It's a very versatile tool, can be used in a lot of different ways. And we use it here at Coastline quite often to help people with writing of essays and concepts like that. We also did a project, and maybe someone will be willing to talk about this a little bit, but one of the things that we did here was we spent some time trying to figure out how to disclose. We use a book called Steal the Show, and all the students were required to create a Steal the Show for disclosure. So how do you share with other people about your brain injury? Some people choose not to share anything. That's not always possible. So what do you share? What do you feel comfortable sharing? And how much do you share with different types of people? Were all part of the assignment, and they were all required to brainstorm this within the Inspiration Maps before they kind of drafted their script for their disclosure statement. Did you find that helpful to be able to brainstorm and group things?
I really did. I found for me the process of doing it visually, externally, was completely different from what I was doing internally. And so I was really better able to see the connections when it was down in front of me. And having an app like Inspiration Maps, I can edit, customize, move it around, and just makes it kind of apparent to me.
It's funny because people have said, oh, well, we do mind mapping, we do graphic organization and brainstorming with poster boards and Post-it notes, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. The limitation of that is when you have to roll that poster board up, unless you're using tape, which is not make it, which doesn't make it flexible in terms of being able to move concepts and ideas. Oftentimes what happens is the ideas get lost within the group because, you know, the Post-it comes loose or something like that. The other thing that you can do with Inspiration Maps and Simple Mind Pro, especially Inspiration Maps, is it has hundreds of preset icons or symbols that you can use. So for memory purposes as well, it becomes a very effective tool in encoding of memories and ideas and concepts. So that's Inspiration Maps. The next one is Notability, and a comparable Android program or app to Notability is something called Audio Note 2. And what Notability does is it allows you to incorporate a variety of different file types, including PDF files. You can import them. You can import email messages into Notability so that all of your information is stored in one place. In addition to that, it allows you to record while you're taking notes. And so you're able to go back and, for memory purposes, slower processing, you know, both problems with brain injury, Notability is a great tool for that, because if a person isn't able to keep up with the writing or the typing of the notes while a teacher or a doctor or someone is speaking, they can be recording that information. And as long as they're writing or typing anything on the screen, what's written on the screen is tagged or associated with what words were being said at that very second. So it becomes a very powerful tool for memory and for a variety of other things. You can use it in school. We also recommend that you use it to prepare for job interviews, to record yourself answering questions to to the questions that a job interviewer might ask, and then to be able to actually hear, to be able to take notes on your responses, to be able to share that information with an instructor, a teacher, a resource specialist, or a therapist to get their feedback, and to be able to incorporate that all into one note is an extremely powerful tool. One other app is Complete My To-Dos. This is a new app that we've just added to the Best Suite. And it's essentially a task management app that addresses a lot of executive function issues in a slightly different way. So we have some features built into Complete My To-Dos that make it different from your average task management or to-do app. And so one of those benefits or features is the incorporation and the integration with the other apps that we've talked about. So those are the apps that we tend to recommend the most. I'm happy to do some demonstrations if you guys are okay with you know, taking some time out to actually see the apps and what they do. Would you mind just letting us know if you're okay with that, or if you have any questions? Okay, perfect. There is a question of will there be Android versions of the apps? The Best Suite, we hope to do an Android version of that app at some point in time. We are trying to kind of finalize what all the features are in the iOS version, and then we hope to start looking for some funding that would allow us to transfer it over to an Android platform. So the answer is yes, we certainly hope so. All right, let's take a look at Notability for just a second. Notability is that note-taking app that I was talking about. And for everyday life kinds of purposes, there's a ton of different things that you can do. You can take pictures from within the Notability app, as you see here. I've got Ralph's and Pavilions, and I could do Sprouts or whatever kinds of markets you might have. You can identify which items you want to purchase. You can take pictures of the sale ads and put those in there. And you can actually check off the items that you get at each market. So that's just one way in which you can incorporate shopping lists and stuff into the Notability app. Notice that one of the things that we've done is we have categorized by saying these are all the items at Ralph's, these are all the items at Pavilions. You could go further and you could divide the items into freezer items or fruit and vegetable items or whatever kinds of items. Again, just a way in which you can incorporate the concepts of cognitive skills. Another thing that you can do with this is you could create something like a travel list. So when I'm traveling, I make sure that I have a list on my iPad of all the things that I want to make sure that I have. You can do tasks list. So here's a picture of a washing machine, and you can identify all the steps to washing clothes in a washing machine. And in this particular case, because I can use the pencil tool and because I can use colored text and highlighters, I can actually go through the process of choosing different things and I can highlight. So there's a lot of different techniques and strategies that you can implement as you're using these different tools. So I have the highlight tool selected. You see I can highlight. A couple of other things, you can do things like incorporate inspiration maps, which is what we have here at the top. And you can incorporate pictures and text all within Notability. So it becomes a very powerful tool in a lot of different ways. Here's one more shopping example where you'll see here I have produce listed. I even identify what side of the store that produce is located. I can take a picture of my favorite chia bars so that it's easier for me to identify once I'm in the store. We're looking at categorization skills here. We're looking at attention to detail. We're looking at similarities and differences. We're looking at visual skills, all just within this one example in Notability. Another thing you can do with Notability is you can keep track of medications. So here's a picture of a medication bottle. I could also incorporate a picture of the pill itself. I've got what doctor prescribed the medication, when it was prescribed, what it's for, where I get my refills. There's a lot of different things that you can incorporate. And again, the idea of showing you these examples is with just one app, we're able to do all of these different things. There's a couple other things that you can do. You can incorporate PDF files. So this is actually a PDF file on the brain that we got online. And what we're able to do with it is within this, we can now circle, we can incorporate our own writing, we can incorporate text all within the notes. So if you're working with students in a school environment, this becomes a very powerful tool for school. You can also incorporate this for job hunting. So for instance, here's an example. Here are some answers to job questions and answers. And one of the ways in which we suggest that you do this is you find the questions that you think are most relevant, that you think will be asked of you, and you incorporate those. And then as we suggested up here at the top, there's a recording feature. You record your answers. You'll be surprised at how many times you say and as you go through that process. This gives you a really great opportunity to hone not only your interviewing skills, but also to hone kind of what you're saying and how you're saying it, as well as prepare for specific questions. You can also keep track of information within this. So if you've taken the Myers-Briggs and you have your scores, you can keep track of all your scores in one place. That's something that my students are doing right now as we work on transition and career development kinds of activities. You can also incorporate notes. So here's an example of a note that we've created on memory. And what we were able to do with this comes from an article that we read together. You'll see that we were able to draw pictures within the app itself. We incorporated images from the internet. And we used categorization skills. We have green text. We have a green dot on this image. So all of the green text is associated with the image that has the green dot on it. If we move down the screen, you'll see we have red text, red dot, and blue text and blue dot. So It's just a way of integrating a variety of different strategies into your note taking. You can use this for school. You can use this for doctor's appointments. Do you guys want to share how you guys use Notability?
So most of us in class actually use Notability, almost all of us, and we use it every day. And one of the things that I thought of as soon as I learned about Notability was, man, I wish I had this while I was in school or when I was working, just because of all of the functions that Michelle just went through. And then I also use it in my personal life as well with questions that I need for doctor's visits, because once you get into the doctor, you're always, sometimes you feel rushed, right? Or you just forget. So I use that also so that I have it right at my fingertips. Again, not using that list that I would usually use before because I would forget to bring that. So I really love using the Notability app.
This is Lisa. One of the features that I was just introduced to with this app is the ability to use speech to text. So for me, it's very difficult to be creative in my thoughts and put those thoughts down on paper. For me, speaking and articulating thoughts is much easier, and I use Notability to record what I'm saying and then to transcribe what I've said into text.
That's a great example. So the feature that Lisa is talking about relates to, just iOS in general, but she's recently learned that one of the things that she can do, let's see if I can do a quick demo here. If you're not familiar with this, there we go. So I'm going to come up here. So if you are familiar with the little icon that shows up to the left of the space bar, if I tap on this icon, this now becomes an opportunity for me to dictate to whatever app I happen to be in. In this case, it's Notability, period. If you speak slowly, this feature will get about 90 to 95% of what you say, period. One of the disadvantages is a limit of time. So because this is actually processing in real time via cloud technology, it will stop after about 90 seconds. The only thing you have to do to continue to make it work is to hit the record button again and continue talking. So one of the things that's kind of interesting about this, and you can see it's continuing to record. One of the things that's interesting about this is a lot of times one of the things that people have difficulty with after their brain injury is processing speed. And so I always encourage my students to use Siri as a dictation feature, because what it does is it requires that you speak slowly and clearly. And if you use a lot of other apps, the tendency is to speak quickly, and something like Drag and Dictate or something like that will potentially be able to keep up with the pace at which you speak. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you're processing that information at the speed that you're actually saying it. So to use something like Siri and the dictation feature of the iOS operating system, I think is actually a great way to work with dictation, but also to work on processing speed and to really be able to put your ideas down on paper in a clear way. Another thing is to use inspiration maps to help generate your ideas, and then use the inspiration map image that you have as a way of helping direct the organization and the structure of whatever it is that you may want to say. So I see that someone asked if we've used these apps with middle school students, and the answer is yes. I don't teach middle school, I teach college, but there are a number of groups up in Oregon, actually, TBI teen groups, that have been using these apps for the last several years with middle school and high school age kids, and have had some success, I think quite a bit of success. Notability and inspiration maps certainly can be used. Inspiration maps is a great tool for kids. The Best Suite is also being used by instructors and resource and school psychologists. up in Oregon. And in fact, we have presented up there a few times and gotten feedback from people that we are actually working right now on converting this or improving this so that it will be even more appealing to kids. So we may be splitting the app into a kids app and an adult version of the app, and we may just incorporate everything together. But one of the things that we're going to be doing is incorporating a reward system and a trophy system, badges, and things like that to help kidify it, if you will. We're not gamifying it, but we will kidify it so that it will be more appealing to kids. What we have heard from people is that they are engaged with the app and they're finding it helpful. If the kids are too young or not able to use it, their family members, their parents can be taught to use it, and it can really be quite an effective tool. Another question here is Evernote on Android the same? I'm not sure. The last time I looked at Evernote, it was not the same. Evernote will allow you to record audio, but it does not synchronize the audio with what you're typing or writing at the same time. So unless that's changed recently, I don't believe that Evernote has that one capability. Evernote has a lot of similar capabilities, but to my knowledge, it doesn't have that syncing ability. I love Evernote's feature of integrating the web clipper feature in Evernote. And for me, I have held on to Evernote for a very long time just for that one feature. But I have found that using Notability has a very similar kind of feature. It works differently, but it works for me, and so I have pretty much moved to Notability. Another thing about Notability, just so that you know, is I think it's currently now $14.99. It's a one-time purchase compared to Evernote, which is an ongoing expense. So that may be something that, you know, might be a consideration for you as well. Are there any other questions that you might have? I'm happy to show you inspiration maps as well. This is inspiration maps. It incorporates a lot of, you can do bubbles and different things like that. You can also, as I mentioned earlier, incorporate images. So here's an example of a person writing out their strengths and weaknesses, and they use some images to just illustrate that. You can use color in inspiration maps to categorize and to group like items. You can do a lot of different kinds of things within inspiration maps. Here's an example. It's kind of a crazy example, but this is a real example of someone's trip to Europe and all the different things that happen to them. It's color coded. You'll notice here we have an outside color for the border and we have an inside color, and all of this information was meaningful to the person that created this particular thing. Yeah.
Michelle, one of the other things with inspiration maps, and Michelle kind of mentioned it previously, was with memory. So the really cool feature, I think that this is helpful in school, is you can use it as you know, the old school index cards, right? So you can type in a bubble for, you know, just brain, right? And then you can add in bubbles of all the other parts of the brain and then hide all of those bubbles and then just try and.
Basically what you can do is you can see the 5 senses, you can hide those senses, so it becomes kind of like a flashcard, as Laura was suggesting. And then also what you can do is for each one of these, you can actually create some notes. So there's lots of different ways built into it that you can test yourself. So it's a great tool for school and for trying to learn any kind of new information. So Amanda, I think that's it. If anyone has any questions, we're happy to answer them. I hope that it gave you kind of an overview, and that having the insights of the students and how they're actually using the technology in their everyday lives can help people kind of get a better idea of the benefits.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was great. We appreciate it. Everybody, you have a couple of minutes to put in your questions if you have one. It's like Betty saying thank you so much for the valuable training. Does anyone?
One thing that I will mention, and it relates obviously to part of CBERT's mission and stuff, is training is so important in this. So to be able to learn how to use these apps and not just what to punch and what to tap and that kind of thing, but really how the apps apply in everyday life and stuff is really important. So I encourage people to seek out training in the use of the apps directly, and then in the generalization and the application of the apps in everyday life.
Well, thank you again so much, Michelle.
Sure, no problem.
And I'm not seeing any questions.
Thanks for inviting us.
So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.